Welcome to the Find a Friend hotline. How can I help?
Hi, I'd like to make some new friends, please.
Perfect. Can I have your name?
Maddie.
And are you a child or a teenager?
Oh, no, I'm an adult.
Oh, sorry, we don't service adults. We've run out of friends for that age group.
What?
Yeah, you see, people over the age of 20 kind of have their groups sorted and they're just not looking for new friends.
Oh.
For Mamma Mia, I'm your host, Ashani Dante. Welcome to But Are You Happy? The podcast for people who've mastered the art of the nervous laugh and emotionally avoided eye contact.
And I'm Dr Anastasia Hronis, a clinical psychologist passionate about happiness and mental health. Have you ever wanted to try and form new friendships as an adult, but haven't been sure how to go about it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Somewhere along the way, asking someone out for a coffee to be friends started to feel weirdly embarrassing.
That's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. How do you actually make new friends as an adult? And why do strong, high-quality friendships really matter more than ever?
Let's get into it. So in our last season, episode 1, we spoke about how to end friendships without ghosting. But today we're looking at the other side of the equation, how to make new friends, particularly as an adult, because let's be honest, it can feel awkward and hard. But before we unpack that, I'm interested to know, why is making adult friendships so important? Like, why should we be making it a priority?
It's interesting because I think the fact that we're doing a podcast episode on this topic goes to show that there is an interest from the general public, from adults, as to how to make, adult friendships. We're not doing a podcast on like how to scroll on your phone more, because everyone knows how to do that, right?
Everyone's
really
mastered
comfortable.
that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think actually what it speaks to is the fact that people don't necessarily feel like they are well connected as adults. Maybe they don't feel like they have enough friends. Maybe they don't feel like those friendships are the sort of quality they want them to be. And when I was doing the prep for this episode, the first thing that actually came to mind about adult friendships was the flip side of that, which is loneliness, and the fact that we're in this loneliness epidemic.
So interesting that you touch on loneliness, because it actually gets me thinking a lot about how, I don't know, I've been in the social impact space for over 10 years, and I feel like there's a lot of mental health charities and campaigns that are out there around building awareness around loneliness. But it does get me thinking about, have we actually made progress? Because people are getting more and more lonely. Like, it's a pandemic in a way.
Yes. And the data would say that we're not actually making much progress, right, over the last few years. I think COVID years really sort of shone a spotlight on feeling disconnected and feeling lonely. But since COVID, we're back to sort of normal social interactions. But the data tells us that people are feeling more lonely than ever. There was a study done by the World Health Organization that said about 1 in 6 people report really high levels of loneliness. And the thing about loneliness is that it's not just a uncomfortable emotional experience, but actually the research says that there's consequences for both our physical and our mental health. So they say that these days loneliness can be almost worse than smoking. Loneliness is linked to premature death, all these actual like physical health outcomes, negative outcomes that is linked to loneliness.
Wow. It's wild when you unpack it like that, because it makes sense how loneliness can impact mental health, because it's such a mental, emotional, internal process. But the fact that you're saying that it impacts our physical health, it shows that it is all connected, which I know we've touched on before in previous episodes too. But it's interesting too, because it gets me thinking about how loneliness, it reminds me of this term escapism. And for anyone tuning in, I have done a bit of homework, some research on the definition of escapism. And look, this is a bit of a controversial opinion, but I did ask ChatGPT, my good old friend ChatGPT, me and Chatty, we have a good bond. And this is what Chatty had to say. Escapism is the tendency or desire to avoid facing reality, responsibilities, or difficult emotions by seeking distractions or immersion in more pleasurable or imaginative experiences. Now, it's interesting when I think about escapism, because I feel like sometimes it's okay to escape a little bit, because I know for me, I've done this, and definitely like my friends and peers, they've done this as well before, where sometimes sitting in the pain of your emotions can be a lot, let alone loneliness, right? And sometimes we do need to eject ourselves out a little bit just to kind of soften the load a little bit. But I think where it starts to become unhealthy and more of something that we should check in on ourselves is when those patterns become really ingrained and become a habit and a constant place that we go to escape. Because it's just important that we look at things in moderation, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Avoidance or having some sort of escape is not fundamentally bad or wrong in and of itself. Lots of coping mechanisms can be really quite healthy when they're used in a useful and healthy way. But it's when we find that we're doing them in excess or we're doing them very automatically that we start to question, is this maybe becoming an unhealthy way of coping?
So true. And kind of links back to what you were talking about, how it can impact our physical health. Like I know when we look at more of the unhealthy ways of escapism, there's, alcohol and substance abuse. And, we're not actually thinking about the long-term impacts of these temporary relief strategies, right? Like we've only got one body in this life and we do need to tend to it.
Yes. And to build on that, I come back to something I've said before, which is emotions serve a purpose and a function, right? So if you are feeling lonely, that's not going to be a pleasant experience. And I understand people would want to sometimes avoid and escape that. But fundamentally, that emotion is giving you a message. And that's a really important message. That loneliness as a construct is this notion that there is a difference between the social connections that I have and the social connections that I desire or that I long for. There is a disconnect there. There is a gap. And so loneliness is giving us the message of like, hey, okay, I'm not where I want to be, but let's do something about this.
I really love the way that you kind of unpacked that. And it actually gets me thinking about social isolation too. Like, is there a difference between loneliness and social isolation?
Yes. So social isolation is the more objective measure of how connected we are to other people. So for example, if we're thinking about, maybe a farmer who lives in a rural property and, there's not many people physically nearby, they're maybe not very literate when it comes to using the internet and sort of connecting with people online, we would say that objectively, this person is somewhat socially isolated. So that's sort of an objective measure, as opposed to loneliness, which is subjective. It's really about how I feel. I might have 100 friends in my friend group, but if I feel lonely, it means I feel that disconnect between what I have versus what I desire.
That's so true. And it kind of stems on how we are in such a digital age where we are hyper-connected, yet we're hearing more and more, especially, in my circles when I've worked with teenagers, that people are feeling really disconnected.
Yes, it's the paradox of social media, that it was designed to be a way to connect with people online, and I think for some people it really can serve that, right? When I think about people who are, maybe physically socially isolated, or maybe are in sort of social groups where they can find meaning and connection online with other similar people to themselves, that can be fabulous for building a network, right? When we're talking about adult friendships, it's not just like the bestie, it's having a network of people in my social space. So online spaces can be great for that, but we just don't want them to be a substitute for the in real life, in-person contact and connection that we need.
It's interesting how you talk about human face-to-face connection, because it can sound so basic, right? Like, connection leads to better health outcomes, but I've seen this time and time again in workshops with teenage girls when we literally create circles. Girls literally say, I feel so much lighter. I feel so much better. I don't feel alone in what I'm going through. And this also extends to my girlfriend. We catch up for a coffee, we sit down, we all just check in. And at the end, we're all like, oh, wow, I feel so much better. It's like, it is such a basic concept, but it really is profound.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you're using those anecdotes of just how you felt and how you feel when you connect with your friends and those social circles. But again, I'm gonna come back to the data and the research.
We love it.
It tells us a similar thing, right? There's the Hilda study that's done every year. So it's a household survey. It follows 17,000 people across Australia every year, and it actually asks about loneliness. And yes, it finds that the more lonely that people feel, the higher rates of psychological distress they have. But on the flip side, the more people are feeling socially connected and physically have people in their life, the less lonely they feel. And we know that there are positive health and mental health outcomes attached to that. So yes, the feeling you have absolutely reflects what the data tells us as well.
Yeah, it's so true because I think, look, it gets me thinking about how I love to journal. Like I can journal till the cows come home, but sometimes I genuinely find when I catch up with my girlfriends, it's really helpful to have a soundboard because I'm like, oh, this happened and then I thought of this. And then my girlfriend would be like, hey, I think you're actually being a bit hard on yourself. Or actually, yeah, no, that's true. Sometimes we can spiral into our own echo chamber. And that's why it's really helpful having someone else to untangle things and help to step things out a little bit, So it is essential.
Absolutely.
So this is probably the $1 million question that we've all been waiting for. Why is it so hard to make friends as an adult? Like, has COVID really screwed us up with our ability to connect?
I think COVID has a part to play.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And maybe more so for younger people and kind of teens, right? When they were really in those crucial developmental phases in terms of making social connections and developing those social skills. But, I think back to being a kid in the playground at just like the local park and there's just like other kids playing there and you're like, hey, you want to play on the monkey bars together? Or like you take turns going down the slide and you don't even know this person, you don't know anything about them, but suddenly you're friends, right?
Yeah.
And just how much easier that can be for us as kids than as adults, right? I'm not just going to go up to someone at a coffee shop and be like, hey, can I sit with you and chat? Because people would think that was weird. But as kids, it's not. And it speaks to, I think, the lack of inhibition that children have, right? They don't yet kind of have that, and I'm talking little kids, right? Like the 5-year-olds, they don't have that kind of social filter that's developed yet.
So true.
There's something to be said for, as adults, we are so much more aware of ourselves and how others might perceive us. And that concern about perception can be a real barrier to us connecting with new people.
So true. And I'm glad you touched on essentially that childlike confidence, right? Because we all had it and it's still in us, but it's true. It's like along the way, life happens, fractures happen, we start to forget who we are and we do have all these limitations from stopping ourselves. So I'm glad we talk about this.
Yes. And to build on that as well, as you're saying, life happens, we go through life. We also experience breaches of trust, disappointments, people letting us down. And so one of the factors that can then be a barrier to us developing friendships as adults is sometimes a lack of trust of other people. Again, as kids, we don't think about, can I trust this person or not? We're just playing on the monkey bars together. But as an adult, I'm thinking, if I'm going to share parts of my life, parts of myself with this person, I want to feel like I can trust them, and trust takes time to build.
And it actually gets me thinking as you're talking about, I don't know if you know the concept of the marble jar by Brené Brown.
Yes.
I used to talk about this all the time in workshops with teens when we would specifically talk about relationships and healthy relationships. And pretty much what Brené Brown talks about, it's like we have a jar full of marbles and that kind of represents trust, right? And then, your best friend would have a full jar of marbles. And then over time, some things happen, right? Like you hear someone gossiping about you who was supposed to be your best friend. So then what happens subconsciously, like metaphorically, you take a bunch of marbles out of the jar and then it's no longer full. And it kind of just goes to this concept of how when stuff happens in a friendship, exactly what you were talking about before around it takes time to build that trust up again. And sometimes it can be really hard for that jar to be full again.
Yeah. Which brings me maybe to the kind of question of, do we need the jar to be full as well,
yeah,
right?
True.
Can we have an interaction, a friendship, an acquaintance with someone where we don't have a full marble jar and we don't kind of hold the expectation that people are never going to let us down, never breach our trust, never disappoint us? I mean, I would say that that's probably a part of life, that people will disappoint us in ways, and maybe at times we get hurt, marbles come out of the jar, and maybe that can be okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really like adult perspective. Because
Thank you.
look at us, so mature here. We lived and we learned. But it is true, and it kind of does take that pressure off and thinking that that person needs to tick all the boxes, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's so true. And it also gets me thinking about how, and I know we talked about this in our episode around trauma in our last season, how you talked about wounds and how, you know, people can be holding wounds from previous relationships. And I know for me, especially in like the self-development space, there's a lot of things called like sisterhood wounds or brotherhood wounds or feminine masculine wounds. And I find it really fascinating because I know for me, I've definitely had masculine wounds and learning to trust men again. And that's been a whole thing. But also, yeah, it just goes to show how important it is to do that inner work, you know, get the therapy you need and do that inner reflection, because we can carry that into future relationships and it can cloud our judgment.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned, so that's one of the first things you feel, like one of the reasons why it can be so hard to make adult friendships. We can harden our hearts, right?
We can harden our hearts and then not be open to those future connections.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so trust, those wounds, that all comes into it. But then on the other side, there's some real kind of practical barriers to developing those adult friendships. And one of the big ones is time, right? Like, as adults, we're busier than when we were as the 5-year-olds playing in the park on the monkey bars, right? So and the trust takes time to build, the connections take time to build. There was actually a bit of research done in the US where some researchers tried to quantify how long it actually takes to build a friendship. Like if you could figure out the amount of time, right? And so what they found was that it takes roughly 50 hours of shared contact to move from the category of sort of acquaintances to friends.
Whoa.
Which feels like a lot.
That's a lot of hours.
And I guess, you know, personality variables may differ there. I don't feel like it would take me 50 hours, but I feel like I'm more of an extroverted sort of personality. Yeah. But roughly 50 hours. So that's a lot of time.
That's a lot of time. Wow. It also reminds me of when Mel Robbins spoke about this in her Let Them Theory book. She said, give it a year. Give it a whole year where if you move interstate or, you know, you're in a new chapter of your life. And it does take the pressure off. You're like, oh, okay, 1 year. Oh, you're telling me I don't need to make new friends in a month? Like it really does put things into perspective.
Yeah, wow. 1 year. I like that.
So I know we kind of touched on this a little bit with the marble jar example. Do you think why it's so hard for us to make friends as an adult is because we put all this pressure on needing this friend to tick all of these boxes?
It could be.
Yeah.
I think this is a really important place for us to talk about different people, different friends kind of serving different roles in terms of our social network. I use the word social network.
I like it.
Because friends can mean so many different things to different people, right? But if we think about it as a network, different people sit in different spaces, right? So I might have the friends who are my very close, dear friends that if they called me in the middle of the night, I would rock up to their house and help them. I know I could get on the phone and cry to them about anything and they won't judge me. You know, we have those really close, deep, meaningful connections with certain people. But not all friendships are going to be like that. We might have the work friends that we enjoy seeing in the workplace. We might have lunch together. We might grab a coffee, but maybe the friendship doesn't extend much beyond that. We might have the friends that we have shared hobbies with. You know, if you're part of a hiking group and you have the friends you hike with, but you don't really see them outside of the hikes, you know, there can be those sort of friends that fill that need in us to have shared interests in things. So different people can sit in different spaces in our lives. And I think it's really important for us to kind of have that map in our head of where different people might sit, because that stops us placing expectations on them that might be unrealistic. Now, it's not to say that people can't move between those spaces. The hiking friend could become that really close, deep and meaningful sort of friendship, or they might just sort of stay in that category, and that's okay.
With this concept of a social network, is that kind of what you play to as well?
Yeah, I definitely think about that. I've got, a few very close friends that I would talk to about anything. I've got my friendship group from high school. I've got friends who are psychologists. So when we get together and catch up and talk, we're usually sort of talking shop.
I love that.
And then I've got friends who are musicians. And so I'll go to gigs with them. I'll hang out with them. I'll go to their gigs, so these kind of different friends that sort of fit in different spaces in my life. And I really love that. I love being able to also bring people together, if I have a birthday and it's like, oh, meet such and such. But I'm also okay with people sitting in those different sort of spots in my social network and, filling those different spaces in the way that they do.
I love that. It's getting me thinking about putting together a visual diagram of what my social network is.
Yeah.
Watch this space, everyone. I'll report back. So something I have loved throughout our episodes is how you like to reference back to the caveman days. And I love it, honestly, because there is so much wisdom and gold we can get from the ancient ways of living, like our previous generations, like the way other cultures do things. And it feels like as a society back in the days, there was more of this village mentality and tribe mentality, which I feel like you have touched on before. But now we've kind of gone into this more individualized culture. So how do we actually go back to those ancient ways of living, of, that more communal way of living?
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting point and topic, and something that we need to address in society. I don't know what the solution is, but, I just think about the notion of people living on their own these days. We're in apartment buildings, some people live alone, and just in some ways how unnatural that is when we compare back to the village days, where you maybe didn't just live with your family, you lived with the village, with the tribe, with that community. And I think a sense of community is a really protective factor for us for our mental health. I know we're talking about adult friendships here, but again, I use this word social network because they don't have to just be friends. It can be the auntie, the cousin, the people in our sort of extended community that maybe we wouldn't consider as friends, but we consider them as part of our community. And as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about cultural groups, right? I have Greek roots, and I would say the Greek community does really well in sort of keeping connected. Would I call everyone that I know in the Greek community my friend? Probably not. But I feel connected to them as a group. No hard
feelings, guys. People tuning in, what?
But there's that sense of shared belonging that I think is really important for us. I don't know if you have a similar thing with Sri Lankan community.
Yeah, I feel like it's an interesting one because I feel like definitely within my family, like my immediate family, there's like, I think I've got cousins that are quite distant and things like that. But I feel growing up, there was a very strong Sri Lankan community. But it's funny, this is a whole episode in itself, but I actually wasn't really a part of that community for certain reasons. But I feel like I have over the years now, since reclaiming more of my cultural roots, I have got a lot more friends that are Sri Lankan and, the innovative, the creative, the entrepreneurs. And I think I've found more of a community there.
Nice.
Okay, Anastasia, we always love a good roadmap from you. So give us the roadmap on how do we make friends as an adult?
The roadmap. So this one is all about taking a two-prong approach, okay? So the first part is building the connections we already have. The second part is making new friendships and new connections, yeah? So I think both of these are really important for us to boost our social network and to combat loneliness and feel more socially connected with other people.
Okay, so what do we do with the current connections we have?
So I would encourage people, and this is going to sound potentially a bit artificial and unnatural, but stick with me.
Yeah.
I'm going to encourage people to get a pen and a paper or get a note out in your phone and actually write a list of the people you know. Okay. Acquaintances, friends, people you've met at, that networking drinks that one time. It doesn't matter who they are, but people that you have some sort of connection with, even if that is a really kind of loose connection, even if they fall into that acquaintance category, they're not yet friends. Write out a list of them. If it helps, group them as the high school friends, and maybe there's a few in there that you haven't spoken to in a while, the work people that you've met at some of those networking events that you might like to connect with a little bit more. Just write out those lists and then take a step back and reflect on, okay, who out of these people do I feel like I might like to get to know a bit better? I might like to build that bond a bit with them. Maybe it is that person I met at the networking. Maybe there is that high school friend that I really liked when I was at school or in those early uni years, but then we kind of lost touch. We went our separate ways, but maybe we could reconnect. Right?
I love that. It's a bit of a friend audit, isn't it?
Yes. That's a perfect way to put it. A friend audit.
Yeah,
exactly.
I love it.
And so I think by doing this, we can really see on paper who we've got, right? Who we've got in that network and where we can work to build the connections. It's a very sort of practical, logical way of going about it. And I think people might have a little bit of a resistance to this kind of idea because it feels like friendships should just happen naturally. You meet someone, you click, it should be easy and natural to keep connected with them. And I think that's a great ideal and it's beautiful if it happens. But again, I come back to we're busy people with adult lives, and often we hear that people would like to be more connected with others, but it just sort of falls off the radar sometimes. And that's no one's fault. It's just the way that life is at the minute. So once you've got the list written out, you've kind of identified some people that maybe you'd like to be more connected with, think about what would be the practical next step for you to actually connect with this person more. Is it that you've got them on Facebook and it's about sending them a message being like, hey, I see that you've had 2 kids, or I see you doing some really cool things, or hey, I was just thinking about you the other day when I walked into the coffee shop and I remembered that funny time when you and I were teenagers and I don't know, whatever the story is, right? Find some kind of friendly link. Sometimes it's worth calling out, hey, look, I know it's been a while and we haven't spoken, but you crossed my mind and I'm really curious to know how you're doing. Be vulnerable, be genuine, be authentic when it comes to actually what you say and how you connect with that person. Sometimes we shy away from the vulnerability, but how nice is it to receive a message from someone you haven't spoken to in a long time and for them to just say, hey, you know what? I was thinking about you and so I'm messaging you now and I hope things are well. And if you've got time, like let's chat, or I'd love to be more connected with you than we are right now. I think that's a beautiful thing to be able to share with someone. And usually the person on the receiving end feels quite good about getting that nice message.
So true.
So I think make a plan for what is the best way to reconnect with these people. And again, it's going to sound a little bit artificial and maybe a bit not natural, but it can work. Set a schedule for connecting with people. Set 15 minutes a day where you focus on building social connections. So you send a text to that person, you send a meme to that other person, you send a voice note to someone, you give someone a quick call, whatever works for you, right? I'm not going to prescribe how people should connect with others. But what I will say is set the time aside, 15 minutes a day, where your focus is connection with other people.
I really love that. I've never thought of scheduling it in.
Put it on the to-do list.
There you go. Okay, so how about making new friends?
This is probably for some people the harder one, right? Particularly if we're a little more introverted in personality, we're maybe a little more socially anxious. Meeting new people and making new friends can feel quite daunting and overwhelming. And this is where I come back to the solution being in community. Find the groups, the social communities that fit what you're interested in. So this is where I recommend join the local book club, join the local run group, the hike group, the knitting group, whatever it is, whatever you're interested in, find spaces where people who are doing things that you're interested in are coming together with a purpose, because there's some sort of activity or task that they're doing, but they're coming together as a collective. this can be an easier way into making new friends where there's a purpose. If you're doing an art class, for example, you're focusing on doing the art. So if you're a little sort of anxious and nervous, you can sort of just stick to doing the painting that you're doing whilst being around people. And over time, that can feel a bit easier to talk to others. But find the community group that's doing something you're interested in and use that as a platform to start to meet new people.
It's so good when you say that because it makes total sense, because if you go to these communities that literally have the same shared interests, you're going to be around people that have similar values and character traits that you are looking for. So I love that.
Yes. And what I found is, and I just talk from personal experience here, people that are in these groups generally are welcoming of new people.
Yeah.
I'll share a sort of bit of a personal story here. I found myself quite interested in country music a couple of years back, before country music was cool. I'm just going to add that, right? I didn't just jump on the country music bandwagon, but yes. And I had for many years wanted to go to Tamworth Country Music Festival. And I didn't have anyone to go with because no one that I knew at the time was interested enough to take time out of their schedule to go up to Tamworth, spend a week up there, listening to country music 24/7. I really wanted to do that. I connected with a few people, but I knew like maybe 2-3 people the first time I went up to Tamworth Country Music Festival. But what I found was when I went there, I made this whole new network of friends and social connections. And it was beautiful. People were very welcoming. People were happy to say hi. People were happy to stand next to you at a gig and have a little bit of a chat. And I think that applies to other community groups as well, where communities are generally welcoming of people being interested in the same stuff that they're interested in. Also, I think there's been a general recognition that as adults, it's been hard to find connection with other people and to form friendships. And so we've seen the rise of groups and platforms that have been developed specifically for the purpose of adults building friendships. So I know recently I've heard a lot about Time Left, and there's another one called The First Round. So if people are listening and don't quite know what these are, they're essentially websites and apps where you can sign up and essentially go have a drink or go have dinner with, say, 4 or 5 other strangers. And the purpose is that these other people who are also coming to dinner or drinks also want to meet other people. So you can fill in your details and they'll sort of profile who you might be similar to pair you with those people to meet up with. Yeah.
So wholesome.
And I also think it's nice because it's a small group. Sometimes it can feel a little bit more intimidating if you're doing kind of a one-on-one sort of new interaction with someone. But the idea of a small group, I think, buffers that a little bit and maybe makes it more likely that you're going to meet someone that you get along with. But it's nice because it takes some of the awkwardness and uncomfortableness out of this feeling of wanting friends as an adult, wanting more friends, because everyone is there for the same purpose.
We've reached that time in our episode where we answer a question or dilemma from one of you, our listeners. Anastasia, our first dilemma for the season is from Naomi.
I'm in my 20s and I really want to make new friends, but honestly, social stuff makes me super anxious. I overthink everything from what to say, how I'm coming across, and whether people actually like me or are just being polite. Even casual group settings feel exhausting because I'm constantly in my head trying to act normal. I end up avoiding things altogether, then feel lonely and frustrated with myself for not trying. I watch people who can just chat easily and feel like I've missed some basic life skill. I don't want this to hold me back forever, but I just don't know where to start and how to get over this fear. Is this something I can actually change, or is it just how I am?
Oh, such a good question.
That's a really good question, and it speaks a lot to anxiety in terms of social situations, which we haven't spoken much about in this episode yet. There's 2 key things I'm going to tell Naomi here, and for anyone else listening who can relate. The first one is, it's really important for us to get comfortable with the idea that not everyone will like us.
Oh, that's so hard, especially for the people pleasers out there.
A hard truth.
Yeah.
Our brain is wired to want people to like us because, again, caveman days.
Shout out.
Social connection was really important. It was important for us to be part of the pack, part of the group, because that offered us protection. We don't need it in the same way nowadays, but our brain still gets anxious if people don't like us. So becoming comfortable with the notion that we won't be everyone's cup of tea is something that takes time and practice to become comfortable with. And I often encourage people to think about the flip side of that, which is we don't necessarily want everyone we meet to be our closest friend. We might think people are fine or sort of be neutral towards them, or maybe they have personality characteristics that sort of don't mesh well with ours. That's okay. That doesn't mean they're a bad person. It doesn't mean we're a bad person. It just means that we're not each other's cup of tea, and that's okay. So if we can get comfortable with this notion that not everyone we interact with is our person, that helps alleviate some of the anxiety.
I love that. And it's kind of like, it's not that one person's better or the other. It's just we're different and we're not aligned.
Yes, we're different. Exactly. The second part is that anxiety shines a spotlight on our own internal experience. So as Naomi was saying, when she's at these social events, she's thinking about what she's saying, she's overthinking what she's saying, she's trying to act normal. You know, anxiety shines that spotlight on our internal experience. I can assure you, no one is thinking about you more than you're thinking about you.
So true. So true.
No one is thinking back and being like, Anastasia, that time 3 years ago you said that stupid thing at that dinner party, right? I might be thinking about it. No one else is, right? Rumination is a very internal process. And anxiety almost tells us that what we do is more significant than it really is. So if we can take that step back, give it perspective and go, I'm not overthinking what someone else did or said or how they were, right? We might think about something in the moment, but then it comes and goes and we're on to the next thing. So just remember that anxiety shines that spotlight in a way that's not necessarily always helpful for us. But I really like this question from Naomi. I think it's a really important one. And actually, we've got an episode coming up this season all about social anxiety. So if you feel like you're listening and you can relate to this scenario, then tune into that future episode.
It's going to be a good one. Anastasia, can you reiterate the main takeaways from today's episode?
100%. First of all, having friends as an adult is important, not just for our sense of social connection, but also for our physical health and our mental health. Second, we are facing a loneliness epidemic, so having friends has been more important than ever. Third, to build your sense of social connection, take this two-prong approach by strengthening old friendships as well as building new ones. And finally, it can be normal and natural to feel a little anxious when connecting with new people. The more we do it, the easier it becomes.